Imagine for a second that sitting right in front of us is a book filled with timeless secrets, answers to the deepest questions we all wrestle with. How should I live? Who can I trust? Where do I find real peace and purpose? Most people scroll past it, or worse, think it's just another dusty old collection of sayings. But what if I told you it's so much more? This book is Proverbs. Not a self-help manual, not a quick-fix dose of motivation, but a treasure chest of wisdom, written under divine inspiration, designed to shape a life of meaning and strength. It doesn't just give advice. It shines a light on the choices we make every day. It shows us the roads that lead to fulfillment and the ones that lead to destruction. The mistake many make is treating Proverbs like a list of clever quotes, something you might glance at, nod, and forget. But these words weren't meant to just sound wise. They were meant to transform. They reach deeper than daily encouragement. They rewire the heart, align us with God's truth, and equip us to face the hardest seasons of life with courage and grace. If you really want lasting change, forget the endless cycle of motivational clips and podcasts. Imagine beginning each morning not with noise, but with wisdom. Words that don't just push you forward, but draw you closer to the one who holds all understanding. Proverbs is alive, speaking right into your story, revealing perspective that makes you see the world differently, through the lens of God's wisdom. Think about where it all began. Tradition tells us much of Proverbs came from King Solomon, a man who could have asked God for riches, fame, or power, but instead, he asked for wisdom, and because his request pleased God, Solomon was given understanding unlike anyone else. What we have in Proverbs is a glimpse of that gift, tiny seeds of truth, each carrying the power to grow and transform if we let them sink into our hearts. These aren't words trapped in ancient history. They're alive. They cut straight to the soul. One line can change the way you see relationships, decisions, even yourself. They're like a compass that always points back to what is real, what is eternal. So if you're ready to experience more than just surface-level inspiration, if you're ready for a journey that will challenge you, reshape you, and bring you closer to God's heart, this is it. Pick up Proverbs. Let the wisdom inside guide you. And don't keep it to yourself. Share it, because this light was never meant for one person alone. In a world stumbling in the dark, Proverbs is a lamp calling us back to the truth. And as we dive deeper together, you'll start to see it isn't just a book of wise sayings. It's a living guide, waiting to unlock a new way of seeing life, one built on God's wisdom, honor, and humility. Picture this, a book written thousands of years ago, yet when you open its pages, it feels like it was written for today. Proverbs doesn't deal in outdated customs or irrelevant lessons. It tackles the struggles that every generation faces. How do we live with integrity in a world full of compromise? How do we choose friends who lift us up instead of pulling us down? How do we guard our hearts, handle money wisely, deal with anger, pride, or broken relationships? Proverbs speaks into all of it. But here's what makes it so powerful. It doesn't stop at giving us life hacks or quick fixes. It goes deeper, showing us how to see the world through God's eyes, how to walk with perspective shaped not by trends or culture, but by eternal truth. At its heart, Proverbs is an invitation to wisdom, but not just any wisdom. It's the kind that begins with reverence for God himself. This wisdom doesn't just tell us what to do. It shapes who we are becoming. It's like looking in a mirror that not only reflects our actions, but also our motives, our desires, the hidden places of our hearts. And that reflection pushes us to live more aligned with God's character, lives marked by humility, strength, and love. The book itself makes this bold claim. The fear of the Lord is the beginning of knowledge. That phrase might sound strange at first, fear the Lord, but it isn't about being terrified of God. It's about awe. It's the deep, humbling realization that we stand before a holy, all-powerful creator who knows the universe down to its smallest detail, and yet still invites us to draw near. To understand why this matters so much, we need to look at Solomon, the man behind much of Proverbs. He wasn't just a king. He was a son of David, chosen by God to lead a nation. And when Solomon could have asked for anything, riches, power, victory, he asked for wisdom. He prayed, "Give me a discerning heart to know right from wrong." That prayer pleased God so much that Solomon was given wisdom beyond measure. So much, so that leaders from across the world traveled just to hear him speak. Yet Solomon, with all his brilliance, never stopped reminding us, wisdom doesn't begin with intelligence, experience, or success. It begins with the fear of the Lord, with humility, with recognizing God as the center and not ourselves. Because without that foundation, wisdom crumbles into pride, and even the brightest mind can lose its way. And Solomon knew this firsthand. Ecclesiastes, another of his writings, reveals a man who chased pleasure, wealth, and achievement, only to conclude that life without God is empty. He wrote, "Fear God and keep his commandments, for this is the duty of all mankind." Those words weren't theory. They came from hard lessons learned. That's why Proverbs insists we start here. The fear of the Lord reorders everything. It reminds us that our understanding is limited, that true wisdom is a gift from God, planted like a seed in those who seek him with reverence. Imagine standing before his throne, feeling the weight of his holiness, the vastness of his power, the purity of his presence. That awe is what keeps us grounded, humble, and ready to learn. But Solomon's story also carries a warning. In his early years, he walked closely with God, guided by wisdom. Later, he allowed his heart to drift, chasing wealth, forming alliances, bowing idols. The very man who wrote, "The fear of the Lord is the beginning of wisdom," let pride pull him away from that truth. And in Ecclesiastes, we see his painful reflection. All that he gained meant nothing without God. That's why Proverbs opens the way it does. It's a call to remember that all wisdom begins and ends with God. Without him, even the wisest can stumble. Our culture today often tells us that wisdom comes from within, that if we just search hard enough, chase success, or find the latest secret to happiness, we'll have it all. But Proverbs offers a radical alternative. Wisdom begins not with self, but with surrender, not with pride, but with humility. Only when we acknowledge God's authority do we step onto the path of true understanding. Imagine opening Proverbs and realizing it treats relationships with the kind of weight most of us forget. It doesn't see friendships as casual or influences as harmless background noise. Every person you allow close to your heart is like a thread woven into the fabric of your life. Those threads either strengthen you, shaping your character and faith, or slowly unravel your foundation. Proverbs is blunt about this. Who you walk will either pull you toward life or toward ruin. Take Proverbs 13, verse 20. Walk with the wise and become wise, for a companion of fools suffers harm. Solomon, as king, lived this truth daily. Picture him surrounded by advisors, commanders, foreign envoys, all with their own agendas. In his early reign, he sought out voices that drew him closer to God, men who helped him govern with integrity. But as years passed, the people around him shifted. His marriages to foreign wives, his political alliances, his counselors who cared more about power than truth, all of these influences pulled his heart away from God. The same man who once asked for wisdom above everything else began to drift, and that drift cost him dearly. That's the sobering lesson. Wisdom in relationships isn't a one-time decision. It's a lifelong commitment. And Proverbs, written out of Solomon's hard-earned experience, warns us not to take this lightly. Think about it. Relationships promise so much. Connection, belonging, even success. But Proverbs challenges us to see beyond the surface. Who we choose to walk beside shapes who we are becoming. That's why Proverbs 22 verse 24 cautions, "Do not make friends with a hot-tempered person, or you may learn their ways and get yourself ensnared." Anger, pride, recklessness, these traits are contagious. Spend enough time with people who live in them, and you'll catch them too. It's not just Proverbs that says this. Another ancient wisdom text, the Book of Sirach, echoes the same truth. Faithful friends are a sturdy shelter. Whoever finds one has found a treasure. Real friends are not just companions for the good times. They're a shelter, a safe place to rest when life feels like a storm. And yet, in our world today, relationships are often treated like they're disposable. Friendships reduced to likes and follows. Connections measured in emojis instead of loyalty. But Proverbs calls us higher. It tells us to seek friendships with purpose, to surround ourselves with people who sharpen us, not dull us. Think about Proverbs 27, verse 17. As iron sharpens iron, So one person sharpens another. Sharpening isn't gentle. It requires friction. Sparks fly, but the result is strength and refinement. A true friend won't just flatter you or agree with everything you say. They'll challenge you. They'll point out the blind spots you'd rather ignore. They'll call you back when you start to drift. That kind of friend is rare, but priceless. Now imagine Solomon again, young, humble, eager to serve God, receiving wise counsel that kept him grounded. Those friendships made him strong. But later, when he surrounded himself with people who prize status and wealth over truth, he lost his footing. His story is a warning written across history. Walk with the wrong people, and even the wisest can fall. So here's the question Proverbs presses on us. Who are you walking with? Who sharpens you? Who challenges you to grow into the person God is calling you to be? And on the flip side, are there voices in your life dragging you off course, nudging you toward compromise, distracting you from what matters most? Proverbs won't let us shrug this off. It calls us to look carefully, to weigh our relationships with spiritual clarity, and to make hard but wise choices. Because the people we keep close don't just shape our days, they shape our destiny. Sometimes the hardest thing to do is to release people who don't truly have our best interests at heart. Yet Proverbs reminds us that friendship is never just about company or social circles. It's a spiritual bond. When we choose to surround ourselves with people who love truth and walk with God, we find the strength to endure life's storms, to grow in wisdom, and to step into the purpose God has written over our lives. And right alongside relationships, Proverbs shifts to another theme with staggering weight: our words. To us, words may feel casual, as if they vanish the moment they're spoken. But in God's view, every word is alive, carrying the power to either build or destroy. Proverbs 18 verse 21 makes it plain. The tongue has the power of life and death, and those who love it will eat its fruit. Think of Solomon, a king whose words shaped an entire nation. A single command could bring peace to thousands, while one careless statement could ignite war. Early in his reign, his speech was marked by wisdom and fairness. But later, as compromise crept into his heart, even his words began to reflect the cracks in his character. His story underscores what Proverbs insists: words are never neutral. That truth stretches into our lives too. Every one of us has felt the sting of a reckless remark, words that cut like a blade and leave invisible scars. And every one of us knows the power of encouragement, the moment when someone's kind words lifted us out of despair or reminded us we weren't alone. Proverbs 12 verse 18 says, "The words of the reckless pierce like swords, but the tongue of the wise brings healing." Picture a sword, sharp and deadly, compared to gentle words that mend wounds and soothe hearts. Which one are we wielding when we speak? Even science today backs up what Proverbs taught long ago. Studies show that words of affirmation can physically lower stress, bring healing, and strengthen bonds, while harsh or negative words raise anxiety and erode trust. Proverbs was pointing to this reality centuries earlier. Our speech creates ripple effects, touching not just those who hear it, but reshaping our own hearts. Proverbs 15 verse 1 adds another layer. A gentle answer turns away wrath, but a harsh word stirs up anger. Think of how many arguments could be diffused if we simply paused, breathed, and responded with gentleness instead of reacting with heat. A calm reply has the power to cool anger before it burns out of control, while a sharp comeback can pour gasoline on the flames. The New Testament echoes this wisdom. James compares the tongue to the rudder of a ship, tiny, but powerful enough to steer a massive vessel. In the same way, our words steer our lives, guiding our hearts closer to God or further from Him. If you ask Solomon, what's the secret to a life of peace? He wouldn't point to wealth or power. He'd tell you, guard your tongue. For him, true wisdom wasn't just measured in what a person knew, but in how they spoke, with gentleness, honesty, and restraint. Proverbs 16 verse 24 paints a vivid image. Gracious word, or honeycomb, sweet to the soul and healing to the bones. In ancient Israel, honey was an everyday treat. It was rare, precious, both sweet and medicinal. Proverbs tells us that our words can be just like that, rare sweetness, restoring and nourishing the soul. But here's the challenge. Our world often celebrates unfiltered speech. We're told to say whatever's on your mind, to let words fly without thought. Yet Proverbs calls us to something higher, to treat every word as a seed, planted either for life or for destruction. So let me ask you, when you speak, are your words bringing healing or are they fueling hurt? Are you building others up or tearing them down? Proverbs doesn't expect perfection, but it does invite us into a new standard, to let our words reflect God's love, patience, and wisdom. Now imagine what would change if every conversation we had carried that awareness. Families would heal, friendships would grow stronger, communities would feel safer, and our own hearts would be lighter, anchored not in anger or criticism, but in grace. Proverbs shows us that words are not just tools. They are gifts entrusted to us by God to be used for His purposes. Proverbs doesn't treat work and wealth as shallow pursuits or quick ways to get ahead. Instead, it frames them as opportunities, moments where our character is revealed, where faithfulness in the smallest details becomes a way of honoring God. Proverbs 10 verse 4 says, "Lazy hands make for poverty, but diligent hands bring wealth." This isn't just career advice. It's a call to see our daily efforts as part of something bigger, our walk with God and the testimony we live out before the world. Solomon knew this tension well. As one of the wealthiest men who ever lived, he saw how prosperity could bless an entire kingdom when stewarded wisely, but he also knew how quickly wealth could corrupt if sought selfishly. That's why Proverbs carries both encouragement and warning. On one hand, it calls us to diligence. On the other, it warns against laziness, greed, and the trap of endless striving. One of the most vivid lessons Solomon gives is almost ironic. He tells us to look at the ant. "Go to the ant, you sluggard. Consider its ways and be wise." Imagine the richest man in the world pointing to the tiniest of creatures as a model of discipline. The ant doesn't wait for a supervisor. It doesn't work only when watched. It labors quietly, consistently, storing food for future. That's the picture Proverbs paints for us. Steady, humble effort that builds lasting provision. But Proverbs doesn't stop there. It also speaks bluntly about money and debt. Proverbs 22 verse 7 says, "The rich rule over the poor, and the borrower is slave to the lender." These words cut straight to our reality today. Credit cards, loans, promises of instant gratification, they tempt us to grab what we want now, but often at the cost of tomorrow. Debt, when unchecked, becomes a form of bondage, chaining us not to freedom but to anxiety and dependence. Our culture often markets debt as the fast lane to dreams. The new car, the bigger house, the lavish trip. Yet Proverbs urges us to think differently. True financial freedom isn't about buying everything we desire. It's about living within our means, finding contentment and trusting God's provision. Freedom means being able to give generously without fear, to bless others without worrying if we can still pay the bills. Even other ancient wisdom texts echo this. The Book of Sirach warns, "Wakefulness over wealth wastes away one's flesh, and anxiety about it drives away sleep." How true is that? Chasing money without wisdom doesn't just drain our bank accounts, it drains our souls. Both Proverbs and Sirach point us toward contentment, generosity, and peace over accumulation. Then comes one of the most surprising truths. Generosity brings gain. Proverbs 11 verse 24 says, "One person gives freely, yet gains even more. Another withholds unduly, but comes to poverty." It's counterintuitive in a world obsessed with saving and stockpiling, but God's wisdom flips the script. Giving opens a door to joy, blessing, and abundance, not always in dollars, but in the kind of fulfillment money can't buy. And when it comes to work itself, Proverbs warns us against chasing fantasies. Proverbs 12 verse 11 teaches, "Those who work their land will have abundant food, but those who chase fantasies have no sense." Solomon knew the allure of shortcuts and get-rich-quick schemes, but Proverbs insists that honest labor, carried out with integrity and patience, brings fruit that lasts. Quick fixes, on the other hand, often end in disappointment or ruin. So here's the question Proverbs presses into our lives. How are we handling what God has entrusted to us? Do we see our work and money as our possessions, or as gifts placed in our hands for a greater purpose? Each job, each paycheck, each opportunity is a chance to reflect God's wisdom and faithfulness. Imagine waking up each morning with that perspective, that your work, whether glamorous or unnoticed, is an act of worship, that every financial decision, is a way of honoring God. That diligence, discipline, and generosity aren't just habits, but reflections of your heart. That's a vision Proverbs casts. A life where our efforts and resources aren't just about survival or success, but about living in alignment with God's eternal wisdom. Proverbs makes it clear. God doesn't just want us to work. He wants us to work with purpose, diligence, and peace in every corner of our lives. And when these teachings begin to resonate, the natural question is, how do I bring my work, my money, my choices into alignment with God's wisdom? Sometimes that reflection is just for us, but often it's also something worth sharing, because the wisdom of Proverbs isn't meant to stop with one person. It's a gift designed to ripple outward, shaping the way we live, work, and give. One of the most central themes that Proverbs weaves throughout its chapters is integrity. To God, integrity isn't simply a good quality. It's the very foundation of a life that honors Him. Proverbs 10 verse 9 puts it plainly, "Whoever walks in integrity walks securely, but whoever takes crooked paths will be found out." Integrity doesn't mean perfection. It's not about never making mistakes. It's about consistency, honesty, and refusing to live a double life. It's the quiet strength of choosing truth even when nobody is watching, even when the easier option might be to cut corners or bend the truth. Think about Solomon. He began his reign celebrated for his wisdom and discernment, a young king who asked God for understanding instead of riches or power. But as the years went by, he faced temptations we all face in one form or another. The allure of shortcuts, the pressure of influence, the seduction of compromise. His story reminds us that integrity isn't a one-time vow. It's a daily choice, renewed moment by moment. Proverbs 11 verse 3 says, "The integrity of the upright guides them, but the unfaithful are destroyed by their duplicity." Integrity works like a compass. In a world where manipulation and half-truths are often rewarded, integrity keeps our path steady. It helps us cut through confusion and temptation, anchoring us in God's truth. Without it, we drift. With it, our steps are secure. Other wisdom writings echo the same truth. The book of Sirach warns, "Do not let your integrity or loyalty be compromised, even if it seems to bring suffering." Both Proverbs and Sirach remind us of something we often forget. Integrity sometimes costs us. Being honest might lose us an opportunity, a friend, or approval. But the reward it brings, a clear conscience, God's favor, and a life aligned with His truth, is worth far more than anything we might gain by compromise. Picture yourself in a moment of testing. Maybe it's a business deal where shading the truth could bring a big payoff. Maybe it's a conversation where hiding the whole story would save you from embarrassment. Proverbs speaks directly into that moment. It whispers, choose the harder path, the path of truth, because while dishonesty may offer quick relief, it always erodes the soul. Integrity, on the other hand, lays a foundation for peace. And integrity doesn't just bless us, it leaves a legacy. Proverbs 20 verse 7 says, "The righteous who walks in integrity, blessed are his children after him." Think about that. When you live with integrity, you're not only protecting your own life, you're planting seeds that will bless your children, your family, your community. Material wealth fades, but reputation for honesty and faithfulness outlives us. Proverbs 4 verse 18 paints a picture of what this looks like. "The path of the righteous is like the morning sun, shining ever brighter till the full light of day." A person who lives with integrity becomes like that sunrise. Their life shines in a dark world, drawing others toward hope, inspiring courage, and proving that it really is possible to walk uprightly, even when corruption is everywhere. Of course, in today's culture, integrity can feel like swimming upstream. We're told to do whatever it takes to get ahead, to cut corners if it means success, to stay quiet when truth feels inconvenient. But Proverbs lifts our eyes higher. It promises that when we walk in integrity, we walk with a confidence no applause can give. Our steps are ordered by God. He sees every act of faithfulness, every hard choice to stand for truth, and He rewards in ways the world cannot. So pause and imagine, what would life look like if we committed to integrity in everything? Marriages built on trust instead of secrets. Workplaces where a person's word carried real. Wait, communities where truth was more valuable than convenience. That's the kind of world Proverbs calls us to build. One decision, one act of honesty at a time. Integrity, Proverbs tells us, isn't just about personal honor. It's a force powerful enough to transform families, reshape communities, and ripple out into the world. Proverbs 28 verse 6 makes the contrast sharp. Better the poor whose walk is blameless than the rich whose ways are perverse. That single line cuts through one of the greatest temptations of every age, the temptation to trade character for gain. Wealth, status, recognition. The world pushes us to sacrifice conviction for success. But Proverbs insists that true riches aren't measured in numbers or titles, but in a life anchored in honesty, faithfulness, and trust in God. So the question turns personal. Are you walking in integrity? Or are there places where compromise has quietly slipped in, where convenience has won over conviction? Proverbs doesn't just ask. It challenges us to examine every corner of our hearts and bring it back under God's wisdom. This is where another theme rises to the surface. Humility. Again and again, Proverbs shows us a paradox that feels almost upside down the world we live in. Greatness isn't found in pride, in projecting confidence, or in striving to appear superior. It's found in humility. Proverbs 16 verse 18 delivers one of the most famous warnings. Pride goes before destruction, a haughty spirit before a fall. This isn't just advice. It's a spiritual law woven into the very fabric of life. Pride blinds, corrupts, and eventually brings collapse. Even Solomon, who wrote so much of Proverbs, wasn't immune. He began with a humble heart, asking God for wisdom instead of wealth or fame. That humility was his strength, the reason God blessed him. But as his kingdom expanded, as his riches grew beyond imagination, pride crept in. Slowly, almost invisibly, it chipped away at his foundation. The man who once declared that the fear of the Lord is the beginning of wisdom eventually let pride draw him into compromise, setting the stage for his kingdom's fracture. Pride is deceptive like that. It often hides beneath success, good intentions, or self-reliance until it's too late. Proverbs 11 verse 2 drives the point home. When pride comes, then comes disgrace, but with humility comes wisdom. The world often dresses pride up as strength, confidence, even something to admire. But in God's eyes, pride is poison. It shuts us off from his guidance because it convinces us we don't need him. Humility, on the other hand, keeps us open, teachable, and dependent on the one who truly knows. Proverbs 3 verse 34 says, "He mocks proud mockers, but shows favor to the humble and oppressed." Humility isn't weakness. It's wisdom. It's the willingness to admit we don't know everything, that our strength has limits, and that our lives are secure only when they rest in God's hands. Other ancient wisdom books echo this truth. Sirach 3:18 advises, "The greater you are, the more you must humble yourself. Then you will find favor with the Lord." That flips our culture's values upside down. The world tells us the higher we climb, the more we should boast. Scripture tells us the higher we climb, the lower we must bend, because true greatness is not in being served, but in serving. Proverbs 29 verse 23 warns, "Pride brings a person low, but the lowly in spirit gain honor." It forces us to ask, where do we find our worth? Is it in recognition, appearance, or achievement? Or is it in the quiet strength of walking humbly with God, trusting him to lift us up in his time? And all of this points to the ultimate example, Jesus. Philippians 2 verses 6 to 8 tells us that though he was God himself, he chose the path of humility. He set aside his rights, took on the nature of a servant, and humbled himself all the way to the cross. If anyone could claim power, status, and pride, it was Jesus. Yet he showed us that true greatness is found in laying ourselves down for others. Proverbs calls us into that same posture, choosing humility over pride, service over status, surrender over self-reliance. Because pride may look strong for a season, but it always leads to a fall. Humility, though it often goes unnoticed by the world, is the soil where wisdom grows and where God's favor rests. Proverbs asks a piercing question. Do you see a person wise in their own eyes? There is more hope for a fool than for them. It's a sobering reminder that pride rarely shows up wearing a warning label. More often, it hides beneath the surface, disguising itself as confidence, independence, or the quiet belief that we already know best. Pride can be as subtle as brushing off wise advice or refusing correction. But Proverbs warns us, when we become convinced of our own wisdom, we close ourselves off from God's. And that is one of the most dangerous places to be. So let me ask, are there corners of your life where pride has crept in? Are there moments where you lean more on your own judgment than on God's voice? Proverbs gently but firmly calls us to lay down that self-reliance and open our hearts to God's wisdom. And when we do, when we let go of our need to prove ourselves, when we accept correction, when we remain teachable, we begin to experience something far richer than pride could ever offer: the fullness of God's love, His guidance, His protection. Humility doesn't mean thinking less of yourself. It means thinking of yourself less. It's remembering that every ability, every opportunity, every blessing comes from God and was meant not just for us, but to glorify Him and bless others. This is why one of Proverbs' most famous teachings is about trust. In a world that glorifies independence and self-sufficiency, Proverbs turns everything upside down. It says real peace and real security aren't found in ourselves. They're found in surrender. Proverbs 3 verses 5 to 6 declares, "Trust in the Lord with all your heart and lean not on your own understanding. In all your ways submit to Him, and He will make your paths straight." Think about the weight of that command. With all your heart, not just when things are hard, not just in the areas we can't figure out, but with everything, our fears, our hopes, our decisions, all of it placed into God's hands. Even Solomon, with all his wisdom, knew that human knowledge has limits. He had insight beyond anyone else. Yet he still wrote that our understanding is too small to grasp God's full plan. That's why he urges us not to trust ourselves, but to lean on the one whose wisdom and power go far beyond what we can see. Self-reliance may feel attractive. It promises control, a sense of certainty, the illusion that we're steering our own destiny. But Proverbs warns of a false security. Proverbs 28 verse 26 puts it bluntly: "Those who trust in themselves are fools, but those who walk in wisdom are kept safe." Our perspective is too narrow, our vision too clouded. Building life on ourselves is like building a house on sand. It won't hold when the storms come. Picture it like walking into a thick forest without a map. For a while, you might manage fine. But eventually, the path twists, the landmarks vanish, and you realize you're lost. Proverbs tells us, God is that map, the perfect guide who sees a path from beginning to end. When we acknowledge Him, when we surrender our plans, He doesn't lead us randomly. He directs with purpose. Proverbs 16 verse 9 says it beautifully. "In their hearts humans plan their course, but the Lord establishes their steps." And yet, trusting God isn't passive. It isn't sitting still and doing nothing. It's an act of surrender, daily, intentional choices to align our lives with His will, even when it collides with our own desires. Proverbs 19 verse 21 puts it this way: "Many are the plans in a person's heart, but it is the Lord's purpose that prevails." Our dreams may feel right, but God's wisdom sees far beyond what we want in the moment. He leads us not just toward what we think will satisfy us, but toward what will truly transform us. Even Job's story echoes this truth. Job 12 verse 13 declares, "To God belong wisdom and power. Counsel and understanding are His." Here was a man who lost everything, who wrestled with questions none of us ever want to face. And yet through it all, he discovered that trusting God didn't mean understanding every detail. It meant believing that God's wisdom and power were enough to carry him through. And that trust produces something the world can't offer: peace. Proverbs 3 verse 24 says, "When you lie down, you will not be afraid. When you lie down, your sleep will be sweet." That's not just about physical rest. It's about the deep calm of knowing you don't have to control everything. It's about the kind of peace that whispers in your soul, even when life feels uncertain. God's got this. So let me leave you with this. Are you really trusting God? Or are you still trying to carry the weight of it all on your own shoulders? Proverbs constantly calls us to examine where our trust truly lies. Are we surrendering our whole heart to God, or are there places where we still cling to our own understanding? The book doesn't sugarcoat it. Leaning only on ourselves is an illusion of control. Real freedom comes when we release that grip and allow God's wisdom to guide every decision and every step we take. Imagine the weight that would lift if we truly believed He is directing our paths, that his plans are always better, and that he knows our needs even more than we do. Proverbs promises that when we place our trust in him, he doesn't remove challenges, but he gives them purpose and direction. Proverbs 3 verses 7 to 8 goes even further. Do not be wise in your own eyes. Fear the Lord and shun evil. This will bring health to your body and nourishment to your bones. Notice what's being said here. Trusting God isn't just a spiritual exercise. It seeps into every part of us. It restores us emotionally, physically, and spiritually. When we lay down self-reliance, there's a renewal that comes, a peace that strengthens us from the inside out. But Proverbs doesn't shy away from the complexities of our humanity either. It zeroes in on one of the most volatile emotions we wrestle with, anger. Anger is powerful. It can ignite wars or shatter families. And yet Proverbs says something surprising. Better a patient person than a warrior, one with self-control than one who takes a city. Proverbs 16 verse 32. Think about that. In Solomon's world, warriors were symbols of power and conquest. Yet he says the true strength isn't in conquering nations. It's in conquering your own heart. Anger, after all, is a natural response. It rises in moments of betrayal, frustration, or injustice. But when it isn't restrained, it can lead to impulsive choices, cutting words, or fractured relationships. Proverbs 29 verse 11 paints the contrast clearly. Fools give full vent to their rage, but the wise bring calm in the end. The world may call venting a sign of strength, but Proverbs calls it folly, because it shows we are ruled by our emotions rather than guided by wisdom. Consider Solomon's perspective as a leader. A rash word from his throne could mean war, loss, or devastation for thousands. He knew firsthand that a king's anger could destroy far more than just one moment. And while we may not rule kingdoms, our anger still leaves wreckage, damaged families, broken friendships, restless hearts. That's why Proverbs urges us to treat anger with caution, to recognize its power, and to keep it under the discipline of wisdom. Self-control, though, doesn't come instantly. It takes humility and constant reliance on God. Proverbs 19 verse 11 tells us, a person's wisdom yields patience. It is the one's glory to overlook an offense. That runs against everything our culture teaches. We're told to clap back, to defend ourselves at all costs. But Proverbs reframes it. True glory isn't in striking back. It's in choosing patience, in letting grace speak louder than anger. And that patience reflects the very heart of God. All throughout Scripture, we see him slow to anger and rich in mercy. Time and again, where judgment was deserved, he showed compassion instead. And he calls us to reflect that same character. When we control our temper, we're not just keeping peace. We're mirroring God's nature, choosing love over wrath, understanding over reaction. Of course, anger itself isn't always wrong. Proverbs 14 verse 29 says, whoever is patient has great understanding, but one who is quick-tempered displays folly. The issue isn't whether we feel anger, it's what we do with it. There is such a thing as righteous anger, the kind that burns against injustice or cruelty. But even then, Proverbs warns us, channel it with wisdom. Use it to build, not to destroy. The book of Sirach carries the same theme. It says, forgive your neighbor the wrong he has done, and then your sins will be pardoned when you pray. Does a man harbor anger against another, and yet seek healing from the Lord? Sirach 28:2-3. Both Proverbs and Sirach challenge us. Holding on to anger not only poisons our relationships, it hardens our hearts toward God himself. Forgiveness and self-control aren't optional. They are essential to living in peace. And in today's culture, this feels radical. We live in an age where speaking your mind, no matter how harsh, is celebrated, where revenge is dressed up as justice. But Proverbs flips the script. Real strength isn't in unleashing rage, it's in restraining it. Proverbs 15 verse 18 says, a hot-tempered person stirs up conflict, but the one who is patient calms a quarrel. That's not just common sense advice. It's a spiritual principle. Choosing patience is choosing peace, and choosing peace reflects the very heart of God. Think about how different our lives could be if we lived this out. How many arguments would dissolve? How many wounds would never be made? How many relationships could heal if we met anger with patience and self-control? Proverbs 25 verse 28 gives us one last vivid image. Like a city whose walls are broken through is a person who lacks self-control. In ancient times, a city without walls was vulnerable to every enemy. In the same way, a life without self-control is defenseless, left exposed to regret and ruin. But when we let God build the walls of discipline and patience around our hearts, we find protection, strength, and peace that anger can never destroy. Proverbs paint a vision of life where self-control doesn't suppress our emotions. It channels them. It takes the fire of anger or frustration and redirects it towards something constructive, something aligned with God's purpose. Imagine how different the world would look if patience, grace, and understanding took the place of retaliation and revenge. What if, instead of letting anger dictate our actions, we chose calm, forgiveness, and trusting God's justice? That's the kind of life Proverbs calls us into, a life where every reaction, every word, every relationship reflects God's character. And this is where the theme of discipline naturally flows in. For Proverbs, discipline isn't punishment, nor is it just a set of rules meant to restrict us. It's a pathway to growth, to wisdom, to a life that truly honors God. Proverbs 12 verse 1 puts it bluntly, "Whoever loves discipline loves knowledge, but whoever hates correction is stupid." Those words are strong because the truth behind them is serious. Discipline and wisdom cannot be separated. To God, discipline is a gift. It's like a father guiding his child, shaping their steps so they don't wander into danger. Solomon himself warns in Proverbs 25 verse 28, "Like a city whose walls are broken through is a person who lacks self-control." Think of that image, a city without walls, completely exposed to attack. In the same way, a life without discipline is vulnerable to every impulse, distraction, and temptation that comes its way. Discipline, then, isn't a burden. It's protection. It's structure. It's what allows us to stand firm when life presses in. Solomon often points us back to the simplest of teachers, the ant. In Proverbs 6 verses 6 to 8, he urges us, "Go to the ant, you sluggard, consider its ways and be wise." Here's the wealthiest, wisest king of his time pointing to a tiny insect as a model of discipline. The ant doesn't need a boss, a schedule, or a reminder. It works steadily, preparing, storing, planning for what's ahead. That's what Proverbs calls us to: self-motivation, foresight, and diligence even when no one is watching. At its core, discipline is about humility. It's the willingness to admit we don't know it all, to accept correction, and to let God redirect our steps. Proverbs 3 verses 11-12 says, "My son, do not despise the Lord's discipline, and do not resent his rebuke, because the Lord disciplines those he loves. As a father the son he delights in." Correction, then, isn't rejection, it's love. When God disciplines us, he's not punishing us. He's protecting us from roads that lead to destruction and pulling us back onto the path of life. In our culture, discipline often feels negative, something restrictive, something that keeps us from doing what we want. But Proverbs reframes it. Discipline is freedom. It empowers us to live with intention, to focus on what matters, to withstand the temptations that drag others down. Proverbs 13 verse 18 warns, "Whoever disregards discipline comes to poverty and shame, but whoever heeds correction is honored." Honor, prosperity, and resilience flow not from shortcuts, but from lives rooted in discipline. Even the book of Sirach echoes this truth. God's mercy is shown to those who accept discipline and who are eager to obey his judgments. Sirach 18:14-15. Both Proverbs and Sirach remind us that correction is mercy. It's God saying he cares too much to let us drift into ruin. And discipline doesn't just shape us individually. It has a ripple effect. Proverbs 10 verse 17 says, "Whoever heeds discipline shows the way to life, but whoever ignores correction leads others astray." Our choices, our example, don't just impact us, they guide those watching us. A disciplined life becomes a light for families, workplaces, and communities. This is why Proverbs ties discipline directly to joy. It isn't about self-denial for the sake of suffering. It's about walking in step with God's wisdom so that our lives are full, purposeful, and whole. Proverbs 15 verses 32-33 says, "Those who disregard discipline despise themselves, but the one who heeds correction gains understanding." Wisdom's instruction is to fear the Lord, and humility comes before honor. In the end, Discipline is God's way of shaping us into people who live wisely, love deeply, and reflect His heart. It's not about controlling every detail. It's about having the strength to choose wisely when it matters most. And nowhere is this more important than in the family. Proverbs lifts up the family as the first school of wisdom, the foundation where character, love, and reverence for God are built and passed down from one generation to the next. Parenting, according to Proverbs, is not just a responsibility, but a sacred calling. Proverbs 22 verse 6 is one of its most famous lines. Train up a child in the way he should go, and when he is old, he will not depart from it. That verse isn't just instruction, it's a promise. The lessons we plant in children's hearts, the example we set through our own discipline, ripple into their futures. Training up a child means more than teaching rules. It means leading them to know God personally, cultivating love for His Word, and showing them, by example, what it looks like to live faithfully. Picture Solomon, one of the wisest men who ever lived, gathering his children and passing on the lessons carved out of both his triumphs and his failures. He knew that wisdom wasn't simply something you handed down through lectures or memorized sayings. It was modeled in daily life. Children don't just absorb what we say. They learn from how we live, how we handle conflict, how we treat others, and how we live out our faith when no one else is watching. That's why Proverbs makes discipline such a central theme in parenting. Proverbs 13 verse 24 says, "Whoever spares a rod hates their children, but the one who loves their children is careful to discipline them." In the biblical context, the rod isn't about punishment for punishment's sake. It's about loving correction, guidance that steers a child away from destructive choices and toward wisdom, righteousness, and life. Discipline in Proverbs is always framed as love in action, the willingness to correct, to protect, and to shape character. But discipline never stands alone. Proverbs balances it with gentleness, patience, and compassion. Proverbs 15 verse 1 reminds us, "A gentle answer turns away wrath, but harsh word stirs up anger." For parents, this means correction must be rooted in love, not frustration. Harshness can wound a child's heart, but loving discipline creates a secure environment where a child feels both guided and cherished. Even the book of Sirach echoes this truth. Whoever loves their son will discipline him often, so that he may rejoice in him in the end. Sirach 30:1-2. Both Proverbs and Sirach agree. Discipline, done well, leads to joy. It isn't about control, but about shaping a child's future, pointing them toward a life of wisdom and peace. And it's not just children who carry responsibility. Proverbs also calls parents to live lives worthy of honor. Proverbs 1 verses 8-9 urges children, "Listen, my son, to your father's instruction, and do not forsake your mother's teaching. They are a garland to grace your head, and a chain to adorn your neck." Parents are to provide guidance that is life-giving, not burdensome. Proverbs 14 verse 26 adds that when a parent fears the Lord, his children have a refuge. In other words, a parent's faith becomes a shelter, a spiritual covering that provides safety, identity, and hope for the next generation. This is profoundly relevant in our time. Families today are bombarded with competing voices, culture, media, peers, all trying to shape values and identity. Proverbs calls us to anchor our homes in God's truth, to let His Word be the foundation of daily life, not just an afterthought, to create environments where children see integrity, patience, and love embodied in real, everyday moments. And the legacy of such faith doesn't stop at one generation. Proverbs 20 verse 7 declares, "The righteous lead blameless lives. Blessed are their children after them." Parents who choose righteousness, who live with integrity, aren't just blessing themselves. They're building a spiritual inheritance that shapes their children and grandchildren. Now, Proverbs doesn't avoid difficult and uncomfortable truths either. It speaks directly about one of the greatest struggles humanity has always faced, sexual purity and the dangerous lure of temptation. Proverbs 5 verses 3-5 warns, "The lips of the adulterous woman drip honey, and her speech is smoother than oil, but in the end she is bitter as gall, sharp as a double-edged sword. Her feet go down to death. Her steps lead straight to the grave." Think about Solomon's position. Surrounded by wealth, power, and temptation, he knew firsthand the cost of letting desire cloud judgment. He compares temptation to honey, Sweet at first, enticing, but with consequences that are bitter, lasting, and destructive. The initial allure blinds us to reality. Broken relationships, damaged reputations, and spiritual emptiness. Proverbs 6 verses 27 to 29 drives this point home with powerful imagery. Can a man scoop fire into his lap without his clothes being burned? Can a man walk on hot coals without his feet being scorched? So is he who sleeps with another man's wife. No one who touches her will go unpunished. Just as fire leaves burns, indulgence in sexual sin leaves scars on our hearts, our families, and our souls. But Proverbs doesn't only warn. It offers the key to resistance. Above all else, guard your heart, for everything you do flows from it. Proverbs 4 verse 23. Purity begins in the heart. Our thoughts, desires, and intentions are the gateway to our actions. By guarding what we allow into our hearts, through what we watch, listen to, and dwell on, we protect ourselves from paths that lead to destruction. Proverbs calls us to vigilance, to live with eyes wide open. Temptation always paints itself as harmless or even beautiful, but Scripture unmasks it as a trap. Guarding our hearts, then, isn't just about avoidance. It's about devotion. It's about keeping our lives centered on God, so that His wisdom, not fleeting desire, shapes our choices. Proverbs paint a vivid picture of what it means to live with vigilance, to guard our hearts and refuse to let destructive influences pull us away from God's design. Solomon, fully aware of the weakness of human desire, warns his readers with urgency. In Proverbs 7, he tells a striking story of a young man lured by temptation, following a seductress who promises delight but ultimately leads him toward ruin. The imagery is haunting, like an ox going to the slaughter, like a deer stepping into a noose, till an arrow pierces his liver, like a bird darting into a snare. Little know it will cost him his life. Proverbs 7 verses 22 to 23. This isn't just a story about one bad choice in relationships. It's a broader warning about how unchecked desire and poor boundaries can destroy us. Temptation always looks appealing at first, but the cost is never small. Proverbs reminds us that the real danger isn't just in the act. It's in the slow drift, the little compromises that eventually pull us far from God. The book of Sirach echoes the same caution. Sirach 9:3 forewarns, do not gaze a virgin, lest you be ensnared by her beauty. Do not give your soul to prostitutes, lest you destroy your inheritance. Both texts highlight a sobering truth. Wisdom begins with setting boundaries, not as chains that restrict us, but as fences that protect us from brokenness, regret, and spiritual ruin. And that warning feels more relevant today than ever. We live in a culture where purity is dismissed as outdated, where temptation is everywhere, on screens, in advertising, even in casual conversation. But Proverbs flips the narrative. Purity isn't about deprivation. It's about living with integrity before God. Proverbs 16 verse 2 reminds us, all a person's ways seem pure to them, but motives are weighed by the Lord. God doesn't just look at our actions. He sees our intentions, the hidden motives of the heart. Purity means aligning our inner life, our thoughts, desires, and choices with God's holiness. There is deep freedom in this. A life of integrity is a life without fear, without secrets, without the constant weight of guilt. Proverbs 10 verse 9 says, whoever walks in integrity walks securely, but whoever takes crooked paths will be found out. Purity and honesty build a foundation of peace. No need to hide, no fear of being exposed, because your life rests in God's approval. But Proverbs doesn't just warn us away from sin. It also gives a vision of what love and intimacy look like when they are embraced within God's design. Proverbs 5 verses 18 to 19 says, may your fountain be blessed, and may you rejoice in the wife of your youth. May you ever be intoxicated with her love. Instead of seeing purity as a list of restrictions, Proverbs lifts up faithfulness as a source of joy. Real intimacy, within the safety of commitment, brings deeper love, trust, and connection than temptation ever could. So Proverbs presses us with the question, how are you guarding your heart? Are you drawing boundaries that protect your soul, or are there places where compromise has started to creep in? The call isn't just to avoid temptation. It's to pursue purity as a path to deeper intimacy with God. And Proverbs makes it equally clear. Sin is not just a misstep. It's a trap that enslaves and destroys. Proverbs 5 verses 22 to 23 declares, "The evil deeds of the wicked ensnare them. The cords of their sins hold them fast. For lack of discipline they will die, led astray by their own great folly." Sin is pictured like a snare, wrapping itself tighter the longer we remain in it. It doesn't simply complicate life. It suffocates the soul and distances us from God's peace and protection. Yet our culture often minimizes sin, treating it as harmless or something we can shrug off. Proverbs insists otherwise. Every choice bears fruit. Proverbs 10 verse 16 explains, "The wages of the righteous bring them life, but the income of the wicked brings them punishment." Righteousness produces peace and joy, but sin always leaves emptiness and regret in its wake. One of the most piercing warnings comes from Proverbs 1 verses 29 to 31. "Since they hated knowledge and did not choose to fear the Lord, they will eat the fruit of their ways and be filled with the fruit of their schemes." Sin is a seed, and whether we intend it or not, it grows into a harvest we eventually have to reap, a harvest often marked by pain, loss, and brokenness. The imagery gets even sharper in Proverbs 6 verses 27 to 28. "Can a man scoop fire into his lap without his clothes being burned? Can a man walk on hot coals without his feet being scorched?" The answer is obvious. Fire always burns. In the same way, sin always leaves scars. Sirach joins this chorus with its own vivid warning. "Flee from sin as from a snake, for if you approach it, it will bite you. Its teeth are lion's teeth, and they destroy the souls of men." Sirach 21:2. Both Proverbs and Sirach pull no punches. Sin is not something to flirt with. It is deadly, and to play with it is to risk being devoured. And yet, in the midst of these warnings, Proverbs offers hope. Sin may bind us, but repentance breaks chains. Proverbs 28 verse 13 promises, "Whoever conceals their sins does not prosper, but the one who confesses and renounces them finds mercy." The danger of sin is real, but so is the mercy of God. Redemption is always available to those who turn back, confess honestly, and allow His grace to restore them. Proverbs reminds us that God is always ready to forgive those who come to Him honestly, acknowledging their failures and seeking His grace. It doesn't invite us to hide or pretend, but to confess, to lay down the heavy weight of guilt and secrecy. Imagine the relief of finally releasing what's been hidden, the peace of knowing you don't have to carry shame any longer, because God's mercy covers it. But Proverbs also warns us with sobering clarity. Proverbs 14 verse 12 declares, "There's a way that appears to be right, but in the end it leads to death." How many times have we convinced ourselves that our way is the best way, only to discover the cost later? This isn't just a warning about making mistakes. It's a call to examine whether our steps are rooted in God's wisdom or in our own limited understanding. Without Him, even the path that looks safe can lead to ruin. Proverbs 16 verse 6 gives us the antidote. "Through love and faithfulness sin is atoned for. Through the fear of the Lord, evil is avoided." Reverence for God, living in awe of His holiness, keeps us from drifting into sin's traps. When we choose to honor Him with our decisions, His love becomes both shield and compass. So let me ask you, are there places in your life where you've ignored the warnings? Paths that feel comfortable, but deep down you know they're pulling you away from God? Proverbs invites us not to gloss over those questions, but to face them with honesty, trusting that God's mercy is greater than any failure. The contrast is stark but freeing. Sin always carries weight, but God's grace is heavier still. Proverbs 11 verse 19 assures us, "Truly the righteous attain life, but whoever pursues evil finds death." This isn't just about physical life or death. It's about the condition of our souls, our peace, our relationship with God. Choosing wisdom leads to life. Choosing sin leads to emptiness. And yet, even when humanity fails, God's sovereignty remains unshaken. Proverbs 16 verse 4 puts it plainly, "The Lord works out everything to its proper end, even the wicked for a day of disaster." At first, those words may feel unsettling, but they reveal something profound. Nothing escapes God's authority, not even rebellion, not even sin. He weaves justice and mercy into His design, ensuring that consequences always serve His greater purpose, either bring us back to Him or show the cost of turning away. This balance of justice and mercy runs throughout Proverbs. In Proverbs 3 verses 33 to 34 we read, "The Lord's curse is on the house of the wicked, but He blesses the home of the righteous. He mocks proud mockers, but shows favor to the humble and oppressed. The message is clear. Pride and rebellion carry a curse, but humility opens a door to grace. God's justice is never random, always reveals His holiness. His mercy, on the other hand, is always extended to those willing to turn back. One of the most powerful aspects of Proverbs' teaching on sovereignty is its focus on the heart. Proverbs 21 verse 1 says, "In the Lord's hand the king's heart is a stream of water that he channels toward all who please him." Even rulers, nations, and powerful figures are not outside God's control. If the hearts of kings bend to His will, then nothing in our lives, not even the fallout of sin, is beyond His ability to redirect. This truth brings both comfort and reverence. Comfort, because it means our mistakes don't derail His plan. Reverence, because it reminds us that our lives are never ours to command fully. God's purposes always prevail. Proverbs 19 verse 21 echoes this. Many are the plans in a person's heart, but it is the Lord's purpose that prevails. We see the same theme in Job's story. After immense suffering, Job declares in Job 42 verse 2, "I know that you can do all things. No purpose of yours can be thwarted." Proverbs echoes that same assurance. No trial, no sin, no setback is outside God's sovereign reach. But God's sovereignty is never cold or detached. It's filled with mercy. Proverbs 28 verse 13 promises, "Whoever conceals their sins does not prosper, but the one who confesses and renounces them finds mercy." Here's the hope. While sin ensnares, confession frees. While consequences remain real, God's mercy transforms them into opportunities for growth, restoration, and deeper intimacy with Him. Even discipline, Proverbs says, is rooted in love. Proverbs 3 verses 11 to 12 reminds us, "My son, do not despise the Lord's discipline, and do not resent His rebuke, because the Lord disciplines those He loves. As a father the son He delights in." His correction is not to crush us, but to guide us back, to refine us, to make us whole. This is the paradox woven throughout Proverbs. Sin brings real consequences, but God never wastes them. In His sovereignty, He uses even our failures to draw us closer, to teach us, to shape us. He is the God who brings beauty from ashes, who turns regret into wisdom, who transforms even broken paths into testimonies of grace. Proverbs 16 verse 9 captures this beautifully. "In their hearts humans plan their course, but the Lord establishes their steps." Even when we stray, God creates a way back. He is the God of mercy, of second chances, of redemption. And His sovereignty means that no mistake, not yours, not mine, is too big for Him to restore. Every consequence, even the ones we wish we could erase, carries the potential to teach us, to bring us back to God, and to reveal His grace in ways we could never anticipate. That's the heartbeat of Proverbs. It calls us to look deeper, to see beyond the surface, and to recognize God's hand shaping our journey even in the hardest seasons. So as we come to the end of this exploration, let me leave you with a question. Are you ready to let wisdom become more than an idea, more than a verse on a page? Are you ready to embrace it as a way of life? Proverbs invites us to walk with integrity, to live with humility, and to hold a deep reverence for God. This isn't wisdom that stays in the mind. It transforms us from the inside out, shaping every decision, every relationship, every word that leaves our lips. Think of the freedom that comes when your life aligns with God's truth. No more masks, no more striving for approval, no more fear being found out. Wisdom gives us the strength to live authentically, anchored in God's love, grounded in His purpose, and filled with His peace. But Proverbs also reminds us that this wisdom isn't just for ourselves. It's a light to be shared, a truth that can guide others who are wandering in the dark. When we pass it on, whether through our words, our actions, or the example of our lives, we become instruments of God's love, helping others find their way back to Him. And at the center of it all is this simple truth. The fear of the Lord is the beginning of wisdom. A heart that reveres God unlocks the doorway to joy, to peace, and to a trust so unshakable that no storm can undo it. May this wisdom guide your steps, protect your heart, and lead you into a life marked by grace and unwavering faith. And may you carry it with you, not just as knowledge, but as a living testimony of God's love. Sparkles of this journey through Proverbs has encouraged you. Don't forget to like this video, subscribe to the channel, and click the notification bell so you won't miss what's coming next. Let's keep walking this path of wisdom together.